All right, welcome everybody back to another episode of the short fiction side hustle. This is number 5, and today I have with me the great Vasha from Reading by the Rainy Mountain, and the also kind
Mediocre
of
Chris.
mediocre Chris from
I
no, the
was going to say,
wonderful
but it's
Chris.
high to low. Yeah, that was the right way to do it. Low to high almost sounds weird. Yeah, you're right.
The calamitous Chris from the Chronicle of Chris YouTube channel. Joining us for the first time on the short fiction side hustle. So very, very much welcome, Chris. Uh, and today we will be talking about the Djinn who watches over the Accursed, the second story in the Reave, the Just and Other Tales collection by Stephen Donaldson. This was a short one. It was only about 24, 25 pages. I think it's probably the shortest one in the book. And but no less interesting for that.
Yeah.
um, so since you're new here, Chris,
Oh,
start with you. What are your overall impressions about this tidy little short story here?
so it is quite short. It packs a lot into it for sure. There's a lot of events that happen. I'm sort of sick about reading about asshole men. It seems like all I've done for the past 6 months is read about asshole men. Um, I'm sort of wondering whether it's going to start, by osmosis imparting on my life. What would Fedham do? To kind of think what I'm doing that, but it does. I Let me see the aspects I really liked. I obviously like the mythology kind of set of it and the kind of events. It's a very classical parable tale story, I think, in some ways of, that could be out of the Bible or anything like that, but very much about person kind of trying to get taught a lesson, doesn't learn the lesson, doesn't learn the lesson, doesn't learn the lesson, learns the lesson, and doesn't learn the lesson in the way that we think he's going to learn the lesson, and so sort of subverts the story a little bit in its own right, but comes to a happy end. So I did enjoy it very, very much, and it's been a while since I started reading the first Thomas Covenant book, maybe 30 years ago, something like that, and that's all I've read of Donaldson. So this is quite nice to jump into.
Yeah, excellent. And Vasha?
Yeah, I really loved the story. It was I haven't read any directly translated Arabian Nights, but I've read a lot of abridged versions of those, or I guess variants of it told to me while I was growing up, and this felt a lot like that. Maybe because the setting is sort of pseudo Middle Eastern, I don't know, but that's not entirely it. Like you said, Chris, it has the tone of a parable, like you would tell a children's fairy story, or like things just go from one event to another without much explanation, or like, okay, this happened and then these were the consequences, like very matter of fact narration style. So yeah, and I suppose it's got some sort of not all the Arabian Nights have a lesson to them. It's just things happened, and this is what was interesting about it. So this felt more like that to me. Like this could be one of the stories that Sherazade tells the king, and
Mm.
yeah, I enjoyed it. It was different from anything I've read in the recent past, and yeah, and I love that the Jinn is the narrator of the story, and
Yes.
it's not, and again, like Reeve, the title person of the story is not the main character, if that makes sense. It's the person we are following, and the title person is helping them in some sense. So
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. That's interesting. The parallels to Reed of Just as far as that goes, and it this is once again, as I think we're going to find going through here, Donaldson is playing with a lot of different aspects of fantasy, and so this this was his kind of dive like into the style of the parable of the in the tales of the Arabian Nights type of story where in the original Arabian Nights stories a lot of bad stuff happens and so he's definitely towing that line with this story because a lot of bad stuff happens in this story as well, and bad stuff happens to the characters, the main characters, and the and they seem to get through it with a lot of stubbornness and almost belligerent type of attitude, like, why is this happening to me, like, without taking ownership for their own actions that led this happening to them. And I love how he kind of, because that you see that in the Arabian Nights too, in some of the tales of those. And I love how he kind of echoed that, and he played with that convention quite a bit in this story. It was fun to read.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think, and this is one of the things that I kind of thought, because I hadn't read fantasy short stories in the way that we've done, say, science fiction short stories, the Djinn almost spells out how much of an asshole he is to me. There is that bit where the Djinn is basically saying, and what did you do yourself, and what did you think, which I kind of thought in some ways is kind of like unnecessary, but also I think just reinforced what his role was, within the story, and what he was going to do. He wasn't just there to stop him killing himself. He was there to kind of make him see, and obviously he learns nothing. Male hubris, and maybe the curse, like / gift of being an attractive person.
Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of liked the Jin's interjection asking him, well, what did you do about it? Because at the time of the curse and the way the story starts, I almost got the impression that he has no choice. Anything that happens to him now is because of the curse. Like, people will sort of swarm to him like flies, and they will fall in love with him, and then people will die. But it's still, to a very large extent, the things he does that brings the events about, who he chooses to interact with, what he tells them in response to their advances. He like it it brought to light, I think, that there is still a significant element of choice in his actions, which he is exercising to bring harm to himself, sure, but mostly to others around him.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And it's he like the very first the first thing that sets all this off, of course, is him being cursed by the old man. Um and because the, the old cuckold, basically. And the even that, right off the bat, he's like, well, he's an old guy. I mean, this shouldn't be a big deal, you know. And
He shouldn't have looked so pretty. She shouldn't have seduced
yeah,
me. It's not my
yeah,
fault.
not my fault, you know. And I love that beginning line, right after the first paragraph that describes the situation. The next very line is that Selmet, who's the husband, the usurer, knew how to curse. And I was like, that was such a definitive statement about what's going to go forward here, because there's no doubt, like no doubt at all, this guy knows how to curse. And so there is no doubt at all the rest of the story is going to see the ramifications of this curse. And I just like how that was just played out, like no doubt.
I, I, I sort of also like how the husband again doesn't take responsibility for his part in the betrayal, if you know what I mean, or the thing, but condemns scores and scores of people to death because of it. Again, he has no this strew of bodies that have been caused to the side in order to teach this one person a lesson, or otherwise, or to make them grow. I thought that was okay. Let's brush over that. That's
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, I didn't think of that. Which lesson this guy doesn't learn, or I actually don't know. Maybe one of you can explain to me what was the lesson he ended up learning. What did he conclude out of his thought process that I must now think like the accursed?
It's a good question. To
Yeah.
me, the only lesson that he learned at some stage, because he obviously is with lots of other people, and through lust, as is explained within the story, he kind of causes the death of loads of others until one person is somebody that he loves, and
Yes.
then he almost like he loses somebody that he loves in it, and that's almost his curse. And his takeaway isn't that, oh, I shouldn't do that again. He's like, oh, I can do this to other people.
Yeah. Well, one of
Yeah.
the
I can use
one
it
of
to
the
hurt people I
lines,
hate.
yeah, one of the lines was like about halfway through the story. He's because it was what's her name? It was Saliandra was her name, and she like he was so wounded, and she watched over him and nursed him back to health.
Yeah.
And he also recovered enough to perceive that she was plain, and for the first time in his life, this is how much of an asshole he was. For the first time in his life, he considered that a woman's virtues might be of more importance than her face. So that was like the lesson he learned there. You know?
Might be.
Yeah,
Be.
might be.
not are.
Yeah.
Might be.
Might
Yeah.
be.
My eyes just passed over that name, but now I'm thinking about just how different that is from Mohan Gopal is a very Indian name. Saliandri is not, or at least it's not in the same class of Indian names as
Yeah.
far as I know. But yeah, I'm. It's interesting how I just like passed through that until I heard it out loud.
Yeah.
Saliandra. Yeah.
Yeah. I love the way the opening sentence of the story. It's Fatim of the Al Hetal made a serious mistake when he allowed himself to be caught. Like it's he doesn't care, or he even made this happen for fun, I guess. So and then when the guy curses, he says, his voice quaking with rage, he explained what he wished the powers whose attention he had invoked to do to Fatim of the Al Hetal. So I love the use of the word explained in that context.
Yeah.
The level of detail that implies.
Yeah. He was quite specific on exactly what was going to happen to all his loved ones and his friendships and everything else. And what was interesting is that's a very interesting point about when he allowed himself to be caught, because we, on the first sentence, we don't know who the narrator is. It's not even clear it's in first person yet. We don't even know that till page 3, where we finally get a I deflected the blow. That was like the first instant that we were like, oh, this is first person. And I thought that was clever, because it gives a new twist to those first few lines where it says he allowed himself. That's the Djinn's perspective. We're saying that he allowed himself to be caught.
That's true. Yeah.
That's not Fedim's perspective.
Yeah. Actually, yes.
Yeah. So that's very interesting, because it's like, because Fedim seems to be he's a dink, but he's also quite clueless sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that the Djinn saying that he allowed himself to be caught, I think maybe giving Fedim a bit more agency than Fedim may himself have had.
Yes.
Yeah.
You gotta think about that.
I guess it goes back to that conversation he had with Fatim later, where he tells him, you had the choice to tell him, no, I'll just work for my passage instead of being a lazy ass. So I guess it's the Djinn sort of opinion or judgment of him that he is greatly responsible for everything that's happening to him. He just needs to think about it for 2 seconds.
Yeah.
And there is a hint of the first person narrator when he says he uttered several phrases which it would be sacrilege for me to repeat, which you think is just the author casually throwing themselves into the stories.
Yeah.
But later it turns out to be the Djinn.
Yeah. It could have been omniscient, rather than the Djinn.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Very clever. Yeah.
To your point, Jared, like Fedim is very much somebody that the world happens to him, rather than him influencing anything within it. And even the points where he does that, he's totally clueless, as you say. You know,
Oh,
as
yeah.
actually his actions having any effect on other people or on the world. He's just only worried about his own self gratification.
Yeah. Oh, completely self-absorbed. And he yeah, the Djinn was saying, do you want me to believe he forced you into his wife's bed against your will? And he's like, no, she invited me. It's not my fault. So
Fair.
you keep saying.
Yeah.
And I love when the Djinn tells him, when he's when he's saying, "His woe is me. Has there ever been a man as unfortunate as I am?" So the Djinn says, "Actually, it seems to me your family and friends are considerably more unfortunate."
Yeah. Being dead and all.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. And yeah, it's yeah, his lack of realization that that he that he can't put that together. He can't put that connection together, that they are dying because of what he did. It's like the curse is pretty horrible, like we pointed out.
Oh, absolutely.
But what you got to wonder what he would have done otherwise. What would have been the right thing for him to do, other than just sit there and be in denial and have his house stoned, and was it burned down or something like that? And then
Yeah,
people
I
were
think it
throwing
just
stones at him.
spontaneously caught some sort of fire and a lot of people died. And
Yeah.
and that's the other thing. People kept turning on him somehow and blaming. So it started with people loving him, and then when bad things happened to them, turning around and sort of telling him, "This all happened because of you." Um, and it took 4 runs over for him to finally decide, okay, this is happening because of me.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. Even the fact that he was the only survivor of the wine incident kind of pointed the finger at him to a certain extent as well.
Yeah. But was one of them was forgiving to him even towards the end? Was it Salyandre or was it Mohan Gopal? Neither of them blamed him.
Correct. Yeah. And what was funny about that is that uh she told him, be at rest, you're among friends. And he told her, you're the only friend I will ever desire. And the Djinn was like, if I've been mortal, I would gnash my teeth and tear my hair, because he still didn't learn that if he gets close to people, they're gonna die. So I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, it's a funny story with like a very, I mean, yeah, I guess the message for me is about no matter how much you feel like things are happening to you, you have a choice in whether that does come about or if it goes the way that, like, whether you have agency, I guess, in those instances. Um, but it's interesting that the lessons coming through this character and that he finally doesn't really learn the lesson. So, like, it's, yeah, I guess this person as a vehicle for this lesson is a very interesting take in the story.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, he does kind of take agency towards the end, because
Hmm.
he actually sets out to cause harm to
Hmm.
certain people.
Yeah.
And
Using
he's
the
looking,
curse
he's
against them.
using the curse against people that he wants revenge against for what happened to him back at his his whole house and his family, and
That's right.
and all that stuff. Yeah, and most important, the woman he actually fell in
Yeah.
love with.
Mhm.
He wanted revenge for the wine incident, and so he actually uses the curse in order to bring about things to get revenge. And that's where we get to the end of his story, where the Djinn is actually filled with pride now with what he's doing. And and it was like the last line just opens up, I think, a bunch of ideas and possibilities,
Yes.
because the very last line, it's like he would eventually become one of the Djinn. And it's just like, oh, so this how the Djinn are created? They're
Hmm.
subjects of curses that they learn how to use them and overcome them. And then is that how this Djinn became the one who watches over these accursed?
Yeah.
And what kind of cycle is going on there? And I thought that was just a brilliant ending. I just thought it was just like, wow, that's wicked interesting to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, that is a very interesting. Yeah, I almost forgotten about that, but yes.
Well, because the whole point is that he doesn't learn a lesson that we think he's going to learn through the course of the book. He
Hmm.
learns how to use the curse for other means, and how to think like a Djinn, and how to because the Djinn will not let him kill himself, and he has those periods where he does try and kill himself, and he's not allowed to, and he's thinking, right, well, how am I going to exist and have some sort of life from now on to the rest? Because he's cursed to never fall in love. He's cursed to have problems in that way. Like, no, I can actually do this with this curse and this power. And
Yeah.
it's a strange story because it starts off with cuckoldry and then ends with sodomy, and it's like it's like it's a 25-page story.
A lot happens.
A lot happens, yeah.
It did it. Am I reading this correctly that he didn't just take revenge on the people who were responsible for the bad situation? He also put the better Wazir in power. It He took out the bad Wazir, the manipulative one, and put the kinder one in power. So he seems to have brought about some good for that city.
Right, yeah, that's right. He did
Yeah.
bring about some sort of political, social change for that particular city because,
Mm.
yeah, he explained that there was 2 viziers and that one was in charge of something and the other one was in charge of something, they had split duties,
Yeah,
and the one who was in charge of the thing
the
was more
manipulation and yeah,
yeah, manipulation stuff, was the one who's clearly more responsible for the wine incident,
yeah.
that even though he was kind of responsible too, but the
Mm-mm.
one he blamed the most for the wine incident, for his
Yeah.
loved one, and, so, yeah, there was some aspect of a greater good going on there, even though it was
Yeah.
for his completely selfish reasons.
Reasons, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of subtext in there, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It it does seem like there is some element of reform, even though it's coming about in a very bloody and violent way. He's like, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
this city has changed now because of him. So, and then he says, "You do your work, Jin, and I'll do mine." So
Yeah,
he's gonna
right.
go about trying to do this elsewhere, I suppose.
Yeah, I like that line. Yeah, you do
Yeah.
your work, I'll do my work.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kinda it's not, and that's where it's different from a lot of fables, is it's not a moral fable. It's not a
Yes, it's not.
moral lesson that he's learning. It's a lesson in accepting his fate and using it to his own best advantage. Um, we don't know whether this Jinn who watches over the Accursed actually likes his job or not.
Yeah.
So is this guy, I don't remember his name anymore.
Fatim.
Fatim, we don't even know if his new realization about what he can do and actually become a Djinn eventually, is that something he's actually going to like, or is he going to be, cursing himself or blaming the other Djinn for the rest of his existence for that happening to him too? We don't even know that.
Or is it just like hyperbole that he might, like when we say someone's so powerful they're practically gods, but like we don't really mean that, we just say that. But is the Djinn saying it like that, or does he actually mean that he can become a Djinn?
Good question.
Yeah, but if he
Wait
does
for the
become
sequel.
one of those, will he have the choice in becoming a Djinn? Yeah, that's an interesting question too.
Very much.
Part 2, the Djinn who watches over the Accursed. Part 2.
The Accursed who becomes a Djinn.
Oh, I like that. I read a
the Djinn
sorry,
who
go
likes Djinn. Part 3.
We know he
Pun
likes wine.
intended.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, I read a YA story. I think there's a Djinn who helps people, like there's a limbo area that they watch over to help them through to the afterlife, and they keep that job for thousands of years until another Djinn comes and takes over or something. So I wonder if this is one of those jobs. Like I wonder what the origin of that lore is, if the author made it up or if it's in the Arabian Nights
Only one way to
or
find
some
out.
other mythology. Read the Arabian Nights. Got it. When are we scheduling the reading group?
I have read it a lot, but it was a long time ago.
Yeah, I don't want to read the unabridged at some point. But... Sorry, tangent. Crap, I dropped my ring. Okay, I'll look for it later. I liked this line about his needs. I forget at what point in the story. I think when he's alone on the boat or something, and then when he's traveling, his needs took on the strength of rage. They expanded until they filled the horizons. His misery increased until it became as great as his self-pity. The scale of that, it expanded and filled the horizons, and then his misery increased until it was the same in size as his self-pity. That's hilarious. Well, not hilarious, like that says something about
that's funny. It's kind of like it's almost like a new moniker here for story. Tragic hilarity.
Yeah.
It's an oxymoron, but it kind of fits.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Fantastic story. I enjoyed it, and I loved that. And just like with Reave, again, it had this element of not being too serious, just like moving from one thing to another, and just the sort of pace of the story allows for the humor, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it was it definitely, and it's funny. It's like it's 25 pages, and we've read 20-page stories in the big book of sci-fi, and we're like, oh man, it's so long. and this story was like done, and it read very quickly. I just think I think that's just a testament to his skill and how he pulls this off, and how he really just is a master at what he's doing.
Yeah, but he uses the 25 pages for a lot of character work. You get invested in the character. It is not just ideas. There are ideas obviously within it, but it's very much about the fate of this individual. Both good, bad, and indifferent within 25 pages. It nearly has the scope of a novel, but within the short story.
And you're right. And I think we found that very similar to the first tale, Read the Just, as well. It had that scope of a novel and that kind of character interest in the main character, who wasn't the title character. And same kind of great skill. I just love how he pulls these things off, and he makes you he makes it a fun, quick read while still being quite in depth and had a lot of stuff to it that we can talk about it.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah. Good story.
All right.
On to the next.
Yeah. Any final thoughts on this one before we move on to the next?
Good start for me. Very much something to get me started in this before we get to what is a much longer, broader story. It seems to be, but yeah.
All right. So next episode we will tackle the story called "The Killing Stroke," and this is this is a novella length story. It's we're looking at
170 pages.
70 pages here. So that's like a small novel almost.
Yeah.
And from what the few things I can remember from 25 years ago, this actually was one of my favorite in the book. So
Nice.
I'm kind of looking forward to that. So we will schedule something next month for that tale.
Nice.
Until then, you can find Chris where?
At the Chronicle of Chris YouTube channel, or on pagedjinn.com, or on Speculative Speculations podcast.
All right. And Vasha?
On the YouTube channel Reading by the Rainy Mountain, or on Speculative Speculations, or on pagechewing.com.
And of course, you can find me at all those places as well, and on my channel here. So, once again, everybody, thank you for tuning in. And if you want to read along with us, please check in on Page Chewing for the schedule whenever that comes up. And we'd love to have you. And with all that said, as I always say, be good to each other. And thank you.